My name is Margaret Mcnair. I'm an attorney for Hope4Families, which is a special education law firm. And in fact, I'm the founder and I'm the managing attorney. We've got about 20 attorneys at this point, and we've been doing this for about 14 years. I'm excited to say and thrilled to say that we can do this free of cost to our clients, and we've seen everything. When I first started Hope4Families, I imagined that I'd be seeing a lot of students that were impacted by disabilities such as visual impairment or deaf and hard of hearing, maybe children on the autism spectrum. I never imagined that we would see many children impacted by social, emotional problems, behavioral difficulties, and mental health challenges. It's crazy times out there. The good news is that the school districts are responsible for providing what children need and what they need uniquely, providing for their unique individual needs educationally. And at Hope4Families, that's what we're about, making sure that that takes place. We're going to be talking about compensatory education, and it'll be a few minutes, but it's such an important topic, and it's I think of it as money getting left on the table. You negotiate for maybe a car, a used car, and afterwards you have a sense that I just didn't get the benefit of that bargain. When you fail to obtain comps and compensatory services for a child, you're leaving money on the table. What are compensatory services? Comps or compensatory services come from the notion that the district has to compensate, that is, make up for what they don't do, what they haven't done. And so it's a way of making things right. And it comes in the form of services or a placement that the district has to provide, has to pay for. That's beyond what is included in the IEP. I can give you a couple of examples from everyday life about compensatories and how we really do this in our regular lives. Let's say you're going to go on a trip and you book a flight, you pay for it. You get down to the airline nice and on time, and you check in your luggage, and you get to the gate and you find out that the airline has overbooked and you aren't going to be able to get that flight. But the airline says, hey, you know what? We got you. We'll book you for tomorrow. Are you good with that? Are we fine now? Are you happy? I don't think so. The airline has not made it right. Because guess what? Where are you going to sleep tonight? What about that meeting you missed? What about the dinner with friends? How's the airline going to compensate for what the airline failed to do? That is, get you on your original flight. Minimally, they're going to need to get a hotel, but even that isn't going to compensate. Hey, how about first class on that flight that they rebooked for you? Now we're talking comps. Now we're talking compensation, making up for what they failed to do that they were supposed to do. Now, in real life, the airline may not make it right. But fortunately for all of us, IDEA insists that districts make it right. And that's what compensatories are about. Let's just talk about compensatories in a nutshell. Once again, compensatories are services or a placement designed to make up for or compensate for something that the district was supposed to do and did not. When the district messes up, it's not enough that they simply now get themselves together. Damage has been done. Damage has been done. Learning has been lost. Time has been lost. How do we make up for that? How do we compensate for that? Compensatories can take the form of services, speech, tutoring, occupational therapy, recreational therapy. Comps can also take the form of a placement, and That placement can be something that is not a stay put, that is something temporary and short term, but it can also be a program that takes place, let's say, over the summer, a speech camp or some kind of drama camp. There's a great program that we got that was with this organization called Pride. It's students that are dyslexic. They use the Orton-Gillingham method, and they've got a great summer program. That can be comps as well. Comps can take many different forms. Comps can also be awarded either through the district paying for comps by contracting with a provider, or comps can be in the form of a pool of money for parents to draw from and use for a variety of services. Now, of course, there's always complications with that, right? How do you draw for it? Do you need to show the receipts? Do you know? The devil is often in the details. And so you are going to really want to look at that pool of money, not with dollar signs in your eyes, but really looking at the details and asking, how do I access this? Do I need a canceled check? Or will it be enough for the provider to provide an invoice and then the district will pay based on that invoice? Really makes a difference. In some cases, comps are going to be what's called contingent. That is, getting the comps is contingent on something else happening. You want speech comps, but your child hasn't qualified as being eligible for speech services. There's going to be an assessment. Comps can be awarded contingent on that assessment coming back, indicating that those speech services are needed. Those would be contingent comps. But many types of comps are non-contingent, and we'll go over that a little bit. Let me give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about when we discuss where comps are indicated, where a child would be eligible for comps. Let's talk about a fourth grader, and we'll call him Ryan. And let's say that he's eligible for speech and language therapy. He gets that 30 minutes per week according to his IEP in a group setting at the school site. But Ryan's speech and language therapist went on maternity leave. And when she went on maternity leave, she didn't get replaced. Well, for the 6 months of maternity leave, Ryan literally got no speech services. Well, eventually the speech and language pathologist returns. Happy days. Ryan is getting his speech again, and we're all set, right? Wrong. Because what about the 6 months that Ryan went without speech therapy? The 6 months during which he not only did not make progress on his speech goals, but may have actually regressed. Time got lost. Damage was done. What's going to compensate for that? Needless to say, Ryan will continue to get that 30 minutes of speech once a week, group setting at the school site. What else might Ryan need though? Could be that Ryan needs another 30 minutes per week of speech therapy at the school site in a group setting. Could be that in addition to that, Ryan needs an hour of speech therapy outside of the school setting, one-on-one with a non-public agency. That would be compensatory. That might get Ryan where he needs to be after the 6 months of no services. Let's talk about the type of compensatories that we see probably most often at Hope4Families, and that is the academic compensatories, often in the form of tutoring. We've got, for an example, a little sweetie named Jasmine. She's 4-year-old. She is in TK. And by the way, the district is responsible for providing her a free and appropriate public education starting from age 3 if in fact she's eligible for special education services. And she was. She was a regional center client on the autism spectrum, had behavioral problems. But somehow the ball got dropped, and Jasmine did not have an IEP and did not have special education services until very late in TK. Finally, the district got it together. They got her IEP toward the end of the school year, toward the end of TK, got her a one-on-one to kind of help with those behavioral issues. Are we good? Should Jasmine's parents be happy now? Has the district done everything that it's obligated to do at this point? No, they have not. Because what about the entire year of TK, where Jasmine really derived no educational benefit from going to school every day? In that case, among other things, we know that Jasmine's going to be behind academically. She wasn't learning to recognize the alphabet. She wasn't learning to recognize numbers. She was running around that classroom for the whole year. In this case, we're going to, among other things, get Jasmine some one-on-one supplemental academic services, which is a one-on-one tutoring for her that she is going to be owed as comps. And for the most part, that's going to be delivered through a non-public agency as well. And I've got to say this too, even though it's kind of an aside, I just think it's really important for us to talk about post-COVID. Post-COVID, so many services and so many service providers have been impacted that before you go into anything and you commit to any relationship with a service provider, you've got to ask about these wait lists. You've got to ask about the availability of the service providers, because it is a little crazy out there. And a lot of these comps, sometimes compensatory education services, in fact, I'll say all the time, they've got an expiration date. A date that they need to be used by. And if that expiration date is not reasonable, you can look up and find that you've been on a wait list for half of the time these comps were supposed to be used. And it's difficult, not impossible, but it's difficult to get that expiration date pushed out once you've agreed on it. Before we even talk about how long do I have to use these comps, you need to have checked in with the potential service provider to see how long will my child be waiting for these services. That's just post-COVID reality. It really is. And it's just something to be aware of. I want to talk to you now about a type of comp that just about every 17 or 18-year-old with an IEP is eligible for. And that is compensation for a transition plan that didn't happen. I want to give you the example of a client of ours, Jalen, 18 years old, about to graduate from high school. And when I say about to graduate from high school, I mean much to the horror of his parents, because they don't feel that he is ready. They don't feel he's prepared. Folks, if a student has sufficient credits to graduate, then the district can graduate the student. Senior year is not the time to start looking at, senior year is a little late. Senior year is late to be looking at, is my son, is my daughter ready to be graduating? 9th grade, 10th grade, got to be looking toward the goal, looking toward the end. Is the student on track? Because I cannot tell you how many times Vicki and Andrea, who do our intakes, get a panicked call from a parent at the beginning of senior year. And this is a parent or the educational rights holder, legal guardian. Get a call from that individual, very much concerned because the student is going to be graduating that coming spring and is not ready. We can do something about that scenario. And among other things, there's always going to be this option to proceed because of the lack of a meaningful transition plan. When students turn about 16, the district from that point on needs to be developing a meaningful and comprehensive transition plan for the student. And you can see why. Because if a student graduates at 18, 19, 17, and has been having special education services throughout their education and is suddenly just cut off, that is, it really kind of negates the whole purpose of us working toward independent adulthood for a student. It doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen for any student. It doesn't happen for typical students. But children who have been getting special education services and then are suddenly cut off, well, that's ridiculous. And yet it happens because the transition plan that the district is responsible for developing is some boilerplate, cookie cutter nothing. And that is almost always the case. So it is almost always the case that the district is going to owe a student 17, 18 compensatories for their failure to transition appropriately. That is also good news for a student who is 22 and the clock has run out and they're no longer going to be getting special education services, not because they didn't graduate, not because of graduation, but because of age. That student as well may be eligible for compensatories based on the failure to adequately transition. And when that happens, those compensatories can be used toward perhaps a program that student will take advantage of after services have dropped away. A lot of times the services that we get that are compensatory for the district's failure to do an adequate transition are services that are going to be used after the student has exited special education. And that's just great. It can be a training program, it can be academic comps, it can be a life skills program. Those comps can take any number of forms, and they're available when the district fails to appropriately and properly transition a student from special education services. There's a whole nother range of services that we haven't talked about, and there are quite a few students that we overlook sometimes in special education. And these are students that have medical issues. Well, we had a little client, little Leah, and she had multiple medical issues. Her grandmother, who's her legal guardian, called us because she was very concerned that the district was about to pull the health care aide that the district had in the classroom. They were about to pull that individual as though Leah no longer needed that kind of care. That was the big emergency that had Grandma calling us, and we handled it. The thing that happened in Leah's case that happens so often is that once we started looking at the educational records, because we're not going to just, Grandma calls us, she said this is the problem. We're not going to simply address that problem. We're going to look at the educational records and see what else is going on. And once we did, what did we see? We see that Leah's being warehoused. And that is just what it sounds like. You're sitting there, waiting. Nothing's happening. Education is not happening. Nothing is happening. By now you know that in addition to addressing a failure to meet goals or the lack of goals and getting that IEP right and tight, in addition to that, Leah is going to be owed some comps, and that's for sure. In this case, Leah's grandmother was a really energetic woman. She's done a lot of research and she had a lot of ideas, a lot of things she wanted for Leah, and it seemed as though it would be appropriate, and it seemed like Grandma had the energy to go out and seek what kind of package she wanted to put together for Leah. In that case, then it made sense for us to negotiate a pool of funds, district funds, for Grandma to access as she found these opportunities for Leah to thrive. And once again, as I indicated earlier, there's a lot of details to be hammered out, right? How is Grandma going to get that money? We have, on rare occasion, had the district just write a check to a family. We have, but that's not the norm. Typically, there's going to be a reimbursement model, and the question is this reimbursement after you have paid, or is it reimbursement in anticipation of being invoiced? If you can take that invoice and then give it to the district and then get the money based on that, or have the district write the check to the service provider, that's preferable. That's preferable. Not everybody has money to pay up front and then wait to get reimbursed. But I think the point I really wanted to make, though, is the variety of types of compensatories that there are. And in the case of the pool of money, it's going to be something loose, educationally related. And that is going to encompass all kinds of therapies. It could encompass swimming, other recreational therapies, social skills, play therapy, music, art, things that we don't typically think about. Those are available in the form of comps. We've been talking about comps, and hopefully this sounds to you like something that I can get. Something I can get for the child who I love, who I care for. Hopefully it seems like something that is accessible to you, because it is. But I do have a couple of things that I need you to keep in mind as you're pursuing them, a couple little pitfalls that I want you to avoid and that can be avoided. The first is really, really important. Sometimes we have parents that call and, they've got disappointments and heartache and grievances going back 5 years, 10 years. And of course, Vicky and Andrea are going to listen and commiserate. They're going to sympathize and empathize. But the bottom line really is that when we are looking at comps, we're only going to go back 2 years. That's all we can do is go back 2 years. What that means is that you can't sit on your disappointment and your grievances. You have to act on them. Because if by the time you come to us, this all happened 3 years ago, we can definitely address concerns having to do with the IEP today and the inadequacies of the IEP right now. But those comps, for something that happened 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it's not going to happen. When there's a grievance, when there's that disappointment, when you're at an impasse with the district, when the student is not getting what the student needs, that needs to be acted upon, because those comps they're accessible when the district failure has occurred no longer than 2 years back. No longer than 2 years back. Another thing that we really just need to be aware of, and that is a pitfall, I'd say, is the matter of proof. The matter of proof. Again, when a parent calls us for an intake, a question that Vicky or Andrea will frequently ask a parent is, who says, that is, who other than you feels that the student needs whatever it is you're talking about? Oh, my son needs to be in this certain school. All right. Who says that your son needs to be at this certain school? Who other than you? Has a teacher perhaps mentioned it? That would be great. Has a psychologist that your child is seeing outside of the school indicated that this might be the best placement? That would be great as well. Some other therapist, somebody that has some level of expertise and some level of objectivity that agrees with you that, for example, this placement would be the place. It's tough when you come to us and you say, my child needs such and such a program, and I know that it would be great for him because my neighbor's child is getting that and it's working for my neighbor's child. That's just a tougher one. I'm not saying that you can't obtain that. I'm saying that it's more difficult. It's more difficult. Let me tell you a little secret. Sometimes the entity that you would like the district to pay for, the service provider that you would like the district to pay for, will actually assess your child and come up with a report indicating that this would be perfect for your child. For example, Linda Mood Bell. Linda Mood Bell will assess your child and come up with a beautiful report so that when Vicki and Andrea ask you at intake, who other than you says that the child needs Linda Mood Bell? Well, I've got this beautiful report generated that says that my child needs Linda Mood Bell. Just be aware that if your child hasn't been getting speech at school and speech was part of the IEP, that's a no-brainer. We're getting that speech as comms. But if you want a certain speech provider as comms, and that speech provider, for example, is not a non-public agency but is private, somebody private, then you're going to need something to hang your hat on. It would be helpful, for example, if this had been your child's speech provider for a while, and then that speech provider would write something indicating how they are unique and how those services are the services that the district really needs to pay for. That's just a little stumbling block. Sometimes we see parents, educational rights holders. The secret is that you have to ask. And let me put it to you this way. Did you know at In-N-Out hamburgers, they have French fries you can get animal style, I think it's called, where they put all the secret sauce on top of the fries and all of that. And then they also have that you could get the burger protein style or something where they don't use the bun, they just wrap the lettuce around there. I don't know, I'm remembering my kids' teenage years, but this was not on the menu, is my point. It was not on the menu. Jamba Juice used to have something like that too, with certain flavors that were available but not on the menu. Comps are not on the menu. They're available but they aren't on the menu, and you have to ask. You have to ask. Who do you ask? I would consider calling for an amendment IEP meeting. I hope you know that you can call for an IEP meeting at any time. The district has to hold one annually. There has to be one a year. But that doesn't mean that you can't call for one whenever you need to. I consider calling for an amendment IEP meeting and requesting comms. How can you phrase that in a way that makes you more likely to obtain them? And I would say that the way to do this is to demonstrate that you are that parent. You are that legal guardian or educational rights holder that needs to be heard. For one thing, instead of asking for tutoring or asking for extra speech, you're going to ask for compensatories. You're going to use the word. You're going to use the word. And in saying the word itself, you'll be labeled in a positive way as that parent that has to be listened to. If your IEP team is showing some hesitation there, I would, in my sweetest voice, in my nicest voice, I would just kind of have a sad face and just say, wow, Guys, I do not want to file a due process complaint. I don't want to bring attorneys into this. I don't want to lawyer up. It's a waste for everybody. That way, you're the good guy, even as you're threatening to file a due process complaint. Again, just about letting folks know letting them know who you are. And hopefully, in response to that, you'll get your comps. And if not, we're here. We're always here to help.